Hi everybody, and welcome back to another Look Back review. Today we're looking at a game collection on the PS4, Uncharted, the Nathan Drake collection. If you've ever wanted to play through an action film, I think this is the closest any game has ever come. From the epic locations, witty and funny banter between the heroes and villains, and a few twists that can turn the story on its head, if a little cliche at times. The original games came out in 2007, 2009 and 2011, which is a really tight turnaround for 3 games to be completed in. So let's have a look and see if Naughty Dog hit the mark, or if this is a game collection you should skip. Development on Uncharted 1 was described as a bit of a nightmare when researching this. The team wanted the game to be a lot more realistic looking, compared to the mostly cartoony games they'd made in the past, like Crash Bandicoot and the Jack series. After watching a video interview with Jeremy Yates by Games Radar, he said that they had so many technical challenges while working on the first game that during one 3-month period they lost around 30 members of staff. They said that the task seemed impossible to achieve and that they'd bitten off far too much than they could chew. This was very different to most games Naughty Dog had worked on in the past, as Jeremy Yates mentioned in the interview that normally the only people that would leave the company would be staff retiring or going on maternity leave. For Uncharted 2, they had a good baseline to build upon, and worked to push the PS3 much more than the original had. They also had more development time to get the game polished for release compared to Uncharted 1. They worked a lot harder on getting the most out of that PS3 and its famously complicated cell processor. They were able to leverage the CPU a lot more, which freed up the GPU to render much bigger and better environments they thought previously impossible. Something they mentioned is that in Uncharted 1, they could render around 150 objects at any one time. In Uncharted 2, they were able to push this to over 500 objects that would render in just a few milliseconds. They also implemented animation blending, which meant Drake could do things like reloading a gun while running or swing a punch from any time in his normal animation. This technology enabled Drake to move a lot more naturally, enabling Drake to weave lots of pre-made animations into his normal movement. This then saved the game designers and animation team a lot of time, as otherwise they'd have to make all these animations individually. For Uncharted 3, the focus was of course on making those epic environments and set pieces as grandiose as possible, but it was also aimed at Drake and exploring him more as a character and his relationship with the rest of the cast. The team at Naughty Dog admitted that the pressure from the public was massive as Uncharted 2 was such a big hit, and they wanted to live up and beat those expectations. The writing team in particular felt a lot of self-imposed pressure as the third game took a slightly different direction to Uncharted 2. Regarding the remaster, it was taken on by a developer called Bluepoint, who has done a lot of work to get these games up to standard for the PS4. Work on Uncharted 1 could be as clear as night and day in some parts, with much better textures, lighting and character models, just to name a few improvements. This is true for all the games, with the improvements getting less dramatic as the games go on. The games were not in bad shape to start with, but all the games have been improved from 30 FPS to 60 FPS, and both Uncharted 1 and 2 now run natively at 1080p, rather than the 720p of the originals. The higher frame rate doesn't only make the game look better, but also helps it play smoother. This, along with a mountain of smaller changes to textures throughout all the games, mean they don't look out of place on the PS4. Bluepoint deserves a big well done. They look and play great in most parts. Some issues from the previous games haven't been completely removed, like the clunkier controls of Uncharted 1, but they've made improvements where possible.
Treasures?
Nope.
No diabolical warlords?
No.
You are the worst liar.
What?
You are.
So all 3 games follow our hero Nathan Drake on a journey around the globe solving puzzles left to him from famous historical figures and civilizations, to find rare and sought after treasures and save the world in the process. Drake himself is a historian and treasure hunter. He's a guy who knows his stuff and uses this throughout the games to help solve puzzles and riddles that have stumped others for centuries. Uncharted 1 is the most basic of the 3. We follow Drake on the trail of his ancestor Sir Francis Drake and his search for the Chintamani Stone, an ancient treasure with a high price tag. Uncharted 2 sees Drake take up a contract with his old friend, which then evolves into a search for the lost city of Shambhala. We travel to several more locations in this adventure and see the game expand in almost every way compared to the first one. We see a returning character from Uncharted 1 make a reappearance, which then starts a love triangle between Drake and his companion for this game, Chloe. It's the most action-packed of the three, and there's plenty of exciting bait-and-switch story twists throughout. Uncharted 3 sees the full cast get involved in what again seems to be a simple job, but leads onto a much larger mystery that puts a strain on many of Drake's friends and their relationships with him. We travel to several locations again, and although we do end the game searching for a treasure and fighting the bad guys, it sits alongside the focus on Drake, his past and his relationships. The way the games play out and how you then progress starts with something as simple as searching an old abandoned tomb, to stealing some special artifacts from a famous art gallery or ancient temple. These help to point us in the right direction of our desired treasure or reveal a bigger mystery for us to go after next. However, with these games playing out much like an action film, this rarely goes to plan, and we'll often end up with a run-in with the game's villains or other competing treasure hunters that always seem to be just ahead or right behind us. Something I found impressive was just how engaging the story was to play through. In fact, all the voice actors and the writing team at Naughty Dog did a brilliant job of creating a set of interesting characters that helps to pull the player into the story and gets us up to date with what we've found, what it means, and where we would be heading next. The plot and the story always came first, and it always left me engaged and motivated to push through that next wave of enemies, climb through the next temple, and solve those puzzles. It should be pointed out that this was more true in Uncharted 2 and 3, as Uncharted 1's story highs just weren't as good compared to its sequels. Although a few story points can be a bit cliche in all three games, I enjoyed them regardless. The stories and pacing do get better and better as the games go on, and for me, I feel like 3 was the best all-round experience. I know a lot of people think 2 is the best, but I feel watching the relationship between Drake and Sully was something I wanted to know more about, so enjoyed it slightly more than 2's love triangle / evil general storyline. And that's something that needs pointing out. These games do a great job of creating a cast of fun and believable characters in each game. Whereas most of the folks you need to shoot down or beat up are the same copy and paste character models, our main cast gets the opportunity to shine against this. Our main villains always have good banter and dialogue with Drake and the others, and this helps to lean even more into that cool action movie feel. Just small things like the funny one-liners Drake says during combat help to make this game feel fun and alive. However, admissions of memorable characters include the villains of the first game, which felt a bit too flat and generic for me. Apart from this, the cast slowly grows on each adventure, and they get more fleshed out as the games go on. It's nothing like Persona levels of depth, but it was just enough to serve the games and the high action movie type tone they were going for. I haven't played Uncharted 4 yet, and if we do get to see even more character progression, that would be great. However, it's not something I'm pining for in these kinds of games.
Watch where you step. Some of these boards are really falling.
These games scream epic action movie, from the slow panning shots during cutscenes and gameplay to the exotic locations and movie-style villains. It makes it clear you're playing through an action film, and it works. The backdrops and locations get much bigger and better from Uncharted 1 to 2, and get even more detailed and dense in Uncharted 3. Uncharted 1 started with a mix of cel shading and realistic graphics, which I can't say I'm a huge fan of, but I do prefer the more realistic direction they took as each game went on. While the cel shading hasn't completely gone away, it's less noticeable, and is mostly used just to smooth out the graphics and help make things pop. This also helps the game age better, as they all look up to scratch considering the games came out on the PS3. Something you'll notice is just how the lighting looks amazing in Uncharted 3, and had me looking at Drake in beams of light impressed just by how good it looked. The older games don't seem to have this to this degree, but it makes me hopeful for Uncharted 4 when I get around to playing it. I also appreciated that the geography, level design and climbable environment never looked too out of place, which had its upsides and its downsides. The downsides were that in Uncharted 1 and a few times in Uncharted 3, it wasn't always clear how to move on to another area. Puzzles to progress, I get, but it was more like I would end up on this ledge next to a dead end and I had no idea where to go next. Small falls or jumps that it looked like you could make, you couldn't. or the camera would have just decided to put itself in such a position that you can't see the way forward. The amazing thing is that if you run around an area for too long, a hint button would appear and would let you know where to go next. I used this say 4 times throughout the whole game, but when I did, I think I verbally said, "Really? That's where you want me to go?" The good sides were some amazing looking areas you end up fighting, climbing and solving puzzles in. Graphics aren't everything in a game, but it would be a crime not to let you know that these super interesting areas helped to suck me into the games. I thought the HUD was pretty straightforward and easy to understand, with the only interactive bit of user interface being Drake's notebook, playing a small role in Uncharted 1 and 2, but being used to solve a good handful of puzzles in Uncharted 3. It helped to give an extra level of depth to the puzzles, and it was a good evolution of that gameplay mechanic. I think the overall style they chose for the games was great. From the jungles, train stations, deserts, war-torn cities and more, it fit well with the game's theme of half-searching lost cities and crypts to the more action-driven segments. And although lacking in variety at the start, the series soon ballooned into an entire world that was bursting with new and interesting locations for the player to explore and play through. So Uncharted's gameplay doesn't expand too much throughout the 3 games, but it does a lot to polish it and stop it becoming too stale. So the 3 main things you'll be doing in these games will be exploration of environments, mostly through climbing and puzzle solving, beating waves of enemies, and big movie-like set pieces. Depending on the location and story context at the time, we do mix these around as to what you're doing in what order, but this is a basic gameplay loop of the game. Exploration was a fun distraction and the climbable was serviceable for what you needed to do. The environments helped to make this an interesting experience, and you would often have puzzle elements thrown in here, so it wasn't always obvious where you needed to go to progress. As mentioned before, it sometimes wasn't clear enough in Uncharted 1, and they had some issues a few times in Uncharted 3, but 2 seemed to have a really good balance and nailed it the best. Not only did the climbing feel more agile in 2 compared to 1, but they introduced these yellow markers on walls and ledges, just to give you a clue as to what you could climb on. It didn't solve the exploration puzzles automatically, but it did let me know what was interactable with, or what direction I should be going, which is why I thought it was strange that it didn't keep this trend up in Uncharted 3, as it introduced an issue that to me had already been solved. Moving on to the standalone puzzles, and these were few and far between in 1, getting a few more in 2, and getting more complex and interesting in 3. While Uncharted 1 and 2 mostly left the puzzles in the exploration, with 2 only having a few standalone ones I can recall, Uncharted 3 started to introduce the use of the notebook as a standard tool to help solve puzzles. This meant looking through Drake's notes to see what he'd written down, and using this to match symbols on the wall, line up pillars, or help to decipher some text. I really liked these, and I found that 3 had just the right amount to break up the action, but not too much to have me getting bored or scratching my head too often. Moving on to combat, and this involved a lot of gunplay, with more of an emphasis put on fist fighting later in the series. You would normally have 2 weapons at all times, like a pistol of some kind in one slot and a heavy gun like an AK or a sniper in the other. You can't hold any more than this, so when you find a shotgun or a different kind of pistol, you needed to pick up what was going to be best for the fight you were in. With some encounters, you also have the option to stealth kill some enemies before they see you with melee takedowns. If you can stealth kill all the enemies in an area, you can use this to actually skip an entire combat sequence. Or you can go in guns blazing. That's up to you. I'm not sure how doable this is in every combat area, as I would normally try to take down as many as I could, but would always end up getting spotted and have to solve it the old-fashioned way. But it does add another way to play, and it's appreciated. The AI are competent throughout the game, giving you a good challenge. They would often work together to outflank me or throw grenades to push me out of cover, leaving me open to attack. The pacing of the combat in all the games does get harder as the games go on, but it often spiked towards the end, which could be a little bit frustrating to play through. But as reloading was so quick and the checkpoints were often so close together, it never had me throwing my controller. Don't get me wrong, there are a few 30-second runs where I just get surrounded and killed by a heavy enemy with a shotgun from behind, and that felt a bit like BS. But giving it another go and finding a way to beat it, well, that made me feel like a badass. It was a great test of my skill, and it did feel enjoyable to play through the majority of the time. The game also adds some flair to this system to give it a more movie feel, by adding the ability to shoot somebody just as they're about to throw a grenade, causing it to land at their feet and blow them up. They even started to add funny voice clips for Drake when he got a headshot, which put a massive smile on my face.
Kick you to sleep!
Again, it wasn't much, but it was appreciated. Overall, it was fun around 95% of the time, but the difficulty spikes could be an irritating roadblock. Lastly, let's look at those set pieces. So what kind of action film would be complete without a car chase, sprinting after a plane while it's trying to take off, or running across rooftops to take down a helicopter? These are similar to a minibus you would find in other action games, and they were a nice way to cap off a level or area. They were always organically weaved into the story, so although they could be far-fetched at first glance, they didn't take you out of the experience. Again, these were clearly inspired by action films, and involved Drake pulling off some stupendous stunts, like firing off an RPG to take down a tank that's been chasing you through a town, to jumping out of a collapsing building and just catching a ledge in another building, which you would then have to run out of as that first collapsing building is now falling into your building. These weren't only memorable moments in the game, but sequences that help the player trust in Drake more as a character. He comes across really genuine and honest in these moments. It's clear he's not a trained soldier or ex-marine. He's a simple guy trying his best, and who doesn't love an underdog? Going back to gameplay, you of course get the improvements involving movement, climbing and aiming as the games go on, as well as those extra improvements Bluepoint has made to help these games feel a lot more modern. For example, you get a good few difficulty options with a mode that's specifically made for speedrunning, which adds a massive amount of replayability if that's something you're into. You get these little updates about how many enemies you've killed or how many headshots you have compared to other players in your friends list at certain points of the game. There's some players in there I haven't spoken to in years, but it was interesting to know that I had more headshots than them at this part of the game. You get a photo mode which isn't something I particularly enjoy, but I know some people can spend hours in these. And with varied locations you get to play through, I can see some people getting a lot of use out of this.
Perfect.
If you're looking to play through an epic action-adventure game that has a focus on movie-style storytelling, cinematic locations and a combat system that's simple to learn but a challenge, then these games have you covered. I enjoyed travelling with Drake, but all those things considered, I found that the first game isn't one I'd recommend you play. It's not a bad game, but when you play through them all, it's just an average game, and it didn't hit the same highs as 2 and 3 do. You get caught up very quickly in Uncharted 2 about what happened in the first game, so it's not like you'd miss out on anything important by skipping it. In the end, it all came down to the fact that Uncharted 1 took around 9 hours for me to play through, and it didn't add anything unique to the overall experience. Once you do play through 2 and 3, if you really want to go back and play it, fair enough. But I think it's a weak start, and it may put you off playing through the rest of the games if you start with it. The fact of the matter is, if you have the collection, I feel you'd only be wasting 9 hours of your life by playing through it. Sorry, but that's my opinion on Uncharted 1. The only people I feel wouldn't like these games are people who just don't like action films, and that's a weird way to recommend a game, but it's hard to compare it to anything else. It's a great fun action-filled experience that was a blast to play through. It could be very linear at times, but on the other hand, it was quite nice to play through a game that just wanted me to go from point A to point B, and not think too much about what was in between, just enjoy the ride. I would say if you can find this game for around £30 or less, it's worth your money and time. I can't wait to play through Uncharted 4, and I'm sure a review will come shortly after. But with that, I hope you enjoyed the review. I hope I've either put a game on your list of things to play, or saved you some time if it's not one for you. You all take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next one.